Being the liar that she is, Michelle figured out a way to delay her sentencing, and she decides to tell the judge that she is pregnant with twins. Michelle Marie, a very interesting person to say the least. And from a young age, she seemed to set out on a path that was kind of bound for trouble. She and her little sister Laura were born and raised in Hurst, Texas. And according to those who knew their family, their father was not the best person. He's often described as a con artist, and Michelle kind of picked up everything she knew from her dad. Michelle went to LD Bell High School, but dropped out at age 17 after she became pregnant for the first time. And even though the baby's father was a man named John Paul Ray, Michelle told another boy, Kenneth O'Brien, that the baby was his. So Kenneth married her, and Michelle and Kenneth began raising their child the best they could, given their circumstances. But this was a short-lived relationship. Their marriage quickly fell apart after Michelle reconnected with a guy from middle school, actually, named Brandon Dixon. But just like her previous relationship with Kenneth, this one was also filled with problems. Michelle was kind of a professional liar in a way. She was very good at lying and lied to get pretty much everything in her life. And it turns out that right before these two were supposed to get married, he found out that she actually was still married to Kenneth. And at the time, Michelle was employed as a dental assistant, but Brandon was very sus about how much she was actually working there. But eventually, she lets her family know that she has quit the dental assistant position because she has gotten a new job working nights as a telemarketer. But in reality, she was fired from her dental assistant job because she was caught stealing from them. Now that she's working nights, Brandon's even more suspicious about what she's really doing when she's at work. So one day, he decides to ask her for the phone number for the telemarketing company just in case he or the kids need her. And she gave him a phone number. Now you're probably guessing it's got to be a fake phone number. Well, it wasn't a fake number. It was a real number, but not to the telemarketing company. It was to a bar, which was actually where she was really working at the time. So Brandon ends up going to the bar and confronts her there about lying to him about where she was working. And as you can imagine, it didn't go well. She was not happy. And he tells her that she can either leave the bar and go with him home or stay and give up her family. So because he was threatening to take her kids away, she left the bar and went home with her husband. But the charades were far from over. Over time, Brandon started to suspect that Michelle was cheating on him. So he decides to try to catch her in the act. He sets up a tape recorder inside their house and he's hoping to pick something up. But not only was she cheating on him, she did so with two different men in their family home. So he decides to tell Michelle that he wants a divorce. And when she hears this, she is not happy. And to get revenge, Michelle goes to some very extreme measures. First, she decides to pour out and kill thousands of dollars worth of saltwater fish that Brandon collects. He has an aquarium. It's a big hobby of his. But not only that, she also poisons his Dalmatian. Brandon had a Dalmatian who he loved named Domino, and she knew it would really hurt him if this dog died. So she poisons him, she brings him to the vet, and convinces them that the dog needs to be put down. As you can imagine, after that whole fiasco, the two of them were definitely donezo. So Brandon files for divorce and Michelle kind of happily moves on at that point as well. So after this marriage fails, remember I told you that the first guy she was with, Kenneth, was not actually the father of her son. It was actually someone else named John. She decides to reconnect with John. Things are going pretty well with John until they were not going well. And John starts to figure out that Michelle's probably cheating on him as well. So he goes through her purse to find signs of infidelity. And when he looks through her purse, he finds a receipt for a dog collar, whipped cream and cherries, and a note that says, "Buy birthday card for Greg." Now you're probably wondering who Greg is. So was John. But she and John were reported to be in a common law marriage at this point for about 8 years before they finally split. So she spent a decent chunk of time with him. But now it was over and she was on to Greg. So Greg Williams had also been married 2 times and had a child before meeting Michelle. The two of them met in 2007 in an online community. Michelle was definitely a very woman, but she often used that to get things that she wanted. So Greg's ex-wife is named Kathy, and the two of them got along pretty well despite being divorced. They knew that they had to put all their differences aside to co-parent their child. Michelle seemed to be the one thing that really came between them. And when Greg and Michelle got married, it was no secret that Kathy was not happy about it. She just knew that Michelle was trouble, but ultimately there was nothing that she could do about it. But what particularly angered Kathy is that Michelle was trying to drive a wedge between Greg and their daughter Taylor. Michelle hated how much time Greg was spending with his daughter. Eventually, Michelle decides to do something about it, so she makes up a story that this 12-year-old girl has a problem. Kathy and Greg, of course, both doubted this was true, but one day, Michelle ends up in the hospital due to ingestion, and she claims that little 12-year-old Taylor drank her coffee. So Michelle spent 2 days at Baylor Hospital, and Taylor was sent to a rehab facility. And Michelle did all that just to try to get some more attention from Greg, which he already was giving her plenty of attention, but she was jealous of his daughter. So eventually, Greg and Michelle decide to have a baby together. They have a baby girl named Michaela, and she became the center of their worlds. Now, they lived in a very affluent area on Jacob Ave in Keller, Texas, which is the kind of place where kids could grow up safely, and crime was kind of a distant idea. It was one of those neighborhoods. They were doing very well financially. Michelle seemed to live as if she really had no budget. So their mansion became kind of the hotspot of the family. They would have many parties there, and the two of them were just these, super fun-loving people that had a lot of money. And so, of course, Michelle's other kids often would visit, but neither of them could truly afford the amount that she was putting on credit cards and spending every week. And Michelle was conveniently Greg's bookkeeper, so she had control of how much money he thought they had. And it turns out she was actually manipulating the numbers to make it look like they were much richer than they really were. At one point, Greg decides to buy her a little frozen yogurt shop as kind of a project to keep her busy. It's not really understood why she wanted this yogurt shop so bad. I mean, she didn't really spend a lot of time actually running it. The two of them also owned a weight training gym, and they were both very passionate about fitness. And Michelle's passion for fitness was way beyond casual workouts. During one of the parties that they threw at their mansion, Michelle met a bodybuilder named Gene Wallace. Gene was a friend of one of her sons and was a lot younger than she was, but this did not stop her from wanting to be with this, young, good-looking fitness expert. But from the outside, it didn't appear like things between Greg and Michelle were rocky. So if she was having this affair, like many suspect she was, Greg seemed to be none the wiser, and they had a lot that they were looking forward to together. On October 12th, 2011, the two of them were about to close on this new house that they were building. This was going to be their dream house, and on paper, the two of them had the dream life. But the dream turned into a nightmare very quickly, because on October 13th, 2011, at 4:40 a.m., the Keller Police Department received a frantic phone call from Michelle Williams, who said that her husband had just been killed. So according to Michelle, the two of them had been up late that night, talking about how they wanted their new house to look, what kind of renovations they wanted to do. She first told the officers that she ended up falling asleep on the couch that night with her daughter, and then she was awoken by a loud sound coming from their bedroom. So she runs to the bedroom to see what happened, and when she gets there, she said she was immediately struck in the head with a metal wrench. She was knocked to the ground, but managed to see a man dressed in all black as he grabbed Greg's gun and shot him in the temple. Obviously, a team of officers were dispatched to the scene, and when they got to the house, they found Michelle crying on her front porch. And because she told them that an intruder had been in their home, they of course began by doing a thorough sweep of the property and the backyard, where she told them the killer had escaped to. And within an hour, their whole house was filled with police, detectives, and forensic analysts. Inside the home, they found her daughter still sleeping on the couch and Greg lying motionless in their bed. So Michelle and Greg's bedroom had a door that led to their backyard, and right outside this door, police found a gun, a shell casing, and the wrench that she was hit with. But what they didn't find was any sign of forced entry or any evidence that anything had been stolen. However, the back door had clearly been scratched at, but the bolt and lock were in perfect condition, almost as if someone tried to make it look like there was a break-in. So it's already looking like the story Michelle has told the police is not matching with the crime scene. But then detectives find an empty bottle of Clorox wipes, and they realize that whatever they had been told that night was probably not the truth. So after this, Michelle is brought in for questioning at the Keller Police Department, and it's early morning at this point. And at the time, she was not considered a suspect, and she was allowed to leave at any point during questioning, which went on for 5 hours. And everything that she initially told police does not align with what they found at her house. And on top of that, they immediately determined that there were no fingerprints on the gun, the wrench, or the door where Michelle said the intruder came in from. There were no fingerprints anywhere. So it was very obvious that those Clorox wipes had been used to clean everything. Also, they started looking at all the neighbors' security cameras, and there is no footage of any new vehicles in that area. The only, quote, new person who drove through was a pizza delivery person who was quickly cleared. And at the end of the day, crime scenes don't lie. And the detective started asking her questions like how an intruder would have even gotten into their house if they clearly didn't break down the door or go through a window or something like that. There was just no evidence of anything like that happening. And as the hours went by, chatting with Michelle, the detective eventually seemed to have enough. And he said he couldn't accept anything that Michelle was saying. And he says that he has a theory about what actually happened that night. And he presents it to Michelle. He tells Michelle about how one time he worked a case where the husband had committed suicide and the wife cleaned up the evidence to make it look like he was killed so that she could collect on his life insurance policy. And then he asks Michelle if that is what happened in this situation. And at first she denies it. She sticks to her story that there was an intruder. But eventually she changes her story and she tells the officer that he was right. So Michelle's new story was that she and Greg stayed up late talking about the new house, and then around 1 a.m. she decided it was time for bed, although Greg stayed awake. She said she saw him take at least 3 Tylenol PM pills before she went to sleep, and then 2 hours later she was woken up by her daughter. And after she woke up, Michelle says she took her daughter to the living room where they eventually fell asleep together on the couch. And she says that Greg is still awake around 3 a.m. when this happens. Then she tells the officer that she asked Greg if he needed anything while she was awake. But according to her, all he wanted was to be left alone because he didn't feel good. Then she goes back to where her daughter is sleeping on the couch, falls asleep, and then she's awoken by a sound in their bedroom. And when she ran into the room, she sees that Greg has shot himself in the head. She then claims that she doesn't want her daughter to see that her father had killed himself. So she needs to convince everyone that he actually was murdered for the sake of her daughter. So she decides to stage the crime scene in order to make it look like an intruder came in and killed Greg. And she claims that she did all this as quickly as she could because she was hoping maybe there was enough time for first responders to get there and actually save Greg's life. So the next thing she does is call 911. After that, she explains that while she's waiting for emergency services to get there, she decides to take a screwdriver and make scratches on the door to make it look like someone broke in. And then after that, she claims that she grabbed a wrench from her laundry room and hit herself across her right cheek so hard that it would bruise and appear as if an intruder struck her. And while all this is going down, Michelle claims that her daughter is just sleeping peacefully on the couch. And after this new confession, Michelle is read her Miranda rights and arrested for filing a false police report. So when it got out to his friends and family that Greg had committed suicide, they did not buy it, especially his mother and his ex-wife, Kathy. So outside of not really believing that Greg did this, people were extremely confused by Michelle's behavior following his death. Actually, one of the first things that she did was contact her lawyer and write an $18,000 check from Greg's business account to pay their attorney fees. And she immediately started selling off their assets. Then she hopped into Greg's BMW with their daughter and took a week-long vacation where she was spotted at several sports bars and shopping for Halloween costumes. What she does start doing is taking the necessary steps to collect on Greg's life insurance policies. Now, in order to collect on someone's life insurance, you obviously need to explain the cause of death because certain deaths can disqualify someone from their policy. So when Michelle reported Greg's death, she put the cause of death down as homicide, even though police had a written statement from Michelle saying that his cause of death was suicide. So the clerk who reviewed her submission obviously doesn't know that, but of course, reading that that Greg was killed sparked an interest. So they decided to Google Greg and Michelle and try to learn more. And something about the whole thing seemed a little fishy to him. So he ends up calling police and lets them know that Michelle has inquired about getting her husband's life insurance money. Finally, on November 3rd, 2011, the medical examiner finished the autopsy, and I'm sure nobody here will be surprised to hear that the results were not consistent with suicide. A report from the Tarrant County Medical Examiner's Office stated that Greg's cause of death was a single gunshot wound to the temple, and the manner of death was homicide. The medical firearms examiner determined that Greg could not have shot himself because the gun was fired at a distance of at least 6 inches away from his head. And the autopsy also revealed that Greg had a sedative in his system when he passed. And so they became certain that Michelle was responsible for her husband's murder. They just needed a little bit more time to build their case against her. And apparently it didn't take long for them to build that, because on January 9th, 2012, she was walking into Lifetime Fitness in Flower Mound, Texas, when she was arrested on 3 charges: murder, tampering with evidence, and filing a false police report. And her bond was originally set to $520,000, but it quickly dropped to $82,000, and she was bailed out after 8 days. And while she was awaiting her trial, Michelle wasted no time moving on with her new life and her new man. Remember Gene Wallace? Yes, he became her boyfriend, and she moved in with him, and they opened up a kettlebell fitness business. So that brings us to the trial, which finally starts on October 9th, 2013. So instead of rolling the dice with the jury, Michelle accepted a plea deal where she would serve 18 years for deadly conduct and tampering with evidence. But being the liar that she is, Michelle figured out a way to delay her sentencing, and she decides to tell the judge that she is pregnant with twins. So the judge allows her to remain on house arrest until after she gave birth. So during this time, she is supposedly at home and pregnant with twins, awaiting her scheduled hearing. However, that is all exposed on January 30th, 2014, when she has to show up at court and she's not pregnant. But of course, Michelle has an excuse. She says that she suffered a miscarriage around Christmas time. Michelle sat down with the crew from 48 Hours and completely changed her story. During her interview, Michelle said that she wasn't guilty of any of the crimes that she had been accused of. And because of this, her plea deal was thrown out, and she'd have to await her fate at the hands of a jury. So that brings us to September 23rd, 2014. The trial begins. And another main component during this trial was the interrogation video of Michelle in the hours after Greg's murder. And the jury was able to see for themselves how she changed her story not once, not twice, but 6 different times. So the trial went on for 6 days. And finally, on September 29th, 2014, after 7 hours of deliberation, a jury came back and convicted Michelle on 1 count of murder and 1 count of tampering with evidence. Michelle ended up being sentenced to 60 years in prison, and she won't even be eligible for a parole hearing until she completes the first 30 years. It's very sad that Greg got involved with Michelle, not knowing what this woman was capable of. She's clearly just, honestly, an evil person and selfish to an extreme extent. But that is going to be it for me today, guys. Stay safe out there.